Welcome to the Made To Flourish Podcast. In this episode today, we're going to be talking about how to cultivate community. We're talking about fear of rejection, how we relate to God and how we relate to people, how to build practical friendships, and things to avoid when you're trying to cultivate real, deep community. I hope you guys listen along and get as much out of this as we did. Back to the Made To Flourish podcast. Today we are talking about cultivating community, which I think is a really great topic for both of us. We're both kind of queen bees in cultivating community in our own life. And it's a question that I get asked a lot on Flourishing Motherhood. And I'm sure you were asked it a lot on He Made Her Whole.
Yeah.
So I am really excited about diving into kind of like our history with community, why it matters, the things that prevent community from forming, practical ways we can form it. I just think that this is going to be a very helpful topic to talk about, especially with mothers and people in our phase of life. I feel like community is
adult friendship.
Adult friendships.
Yeah.
It's foundational. It's hard. A lot of us had to move because our husband got different jobs or we're military wives or whatever. Like we've been taken out of a community we might have grown in or grown up in and placed in a new one. And now it's like, I forgot how to make friends. Like, how do people do this?
Absolutely. I know.
Before we get started though, I know that we wanted to kind of do little fun facts about our life. What's something that people don't really know about you?
Yeah. Yeah. So first off, for those who are listening and not watching us on YouTube, we are sitting here with our iced lattes, which is cheers, my friend, which you must know is top love language for me, especially drinking it with someone.
Yes.
So I'm very grateful to be drinking this with you today.
Need the experience.
Exactly. It's the experience of drinking it together. But I would say like a really random, funny, strange thing that most people would not know about me is that when I was in middle school, I seriously considered.
I know you're just going to say already.
Seriously considered, and truly, I feel like had either they were just messing with me and giving me the impression that they were okay with it, or I truly had them convinced that I was going to legally rename myself Rachel.
Wow. From Yasmina to Rachel.
From Yasmina to Rachel. And it's because I started seeing like all of these girls who kind of looked like me, just like tan skin, brown hair, brown eyes, and they're all named Rachel. And I was like, you know what?
I was going to say, you actually look like a Rachel.
I could be a Rachel.
You could be. But Yasmina is so much better.
I know, but like middle school, it's like everyone looks at you like,
yeah,
you have that name. And I'm like, I don't know.
I'm Arabic.
And that's a cool fun fact too.
That's a really fun fact. I think that's your funnest fact.
That I'm half Arabic.
Yeah, you're half Egyptian. Not just Arabic, Egyptian.
Yeah, like, Egyptian, right. I never even know actually if even saying that I'm Arabic is like the proper terminology. Okay, you would know because you
can't
actually
say you're half Muslim. That would be improper.
I feel like you are more Arabic than I am because you've lived in Egypt, or you're more Egyptian than I am. You've lived in Egypt. So what's so cool about this even connection is that my dad's from Cairo, Egypt. My mom is from Jersey, and she is Caucasian of all sorts, all of the European, the European descents. But my dad's from Cairo, and Meg lived in Cairo.
I know, and I loved it.
And I've never been.
Was so much fun. We're gonna go one day.
Yeah, 100%.
We're gonna have the time of our lives.
Absolutely. So that's a little fun fact. What about you, Meg?
I was actually thinking about my fun fact this morning when I woke up. I don't know why, but I'm trying to think of like the right words to even put this. I guess I should say my fun fact is that my family kind of escaped a cult when I was younger.
Okay, let's talk about that.
Escaped, not like we had to like pack up and run, but escaped a cult meaning like most people who enter into cults, you don't realize you're in a cult until like you're out of it, right?
Right.
And so I'm having this conversation with my mom a few years ago, and we're talking about the first church they were part of, because I find out that like she wasn't allowed to wear pants. It was really, really cold the year she was pregnant with me. And she really wanted to wear a pair of pants. And so she went out and she bought a pair of jeans just to wear in her house. And a friend was coming over and had a little kid with her. And when my mom opened the door, she covered her son's eyes so he couldn't see my mom.
Oh my goodness.
And I was like, I was putting the pieces together. So I'm like, wait, you weren't allowed to wear pants? And she's like, no, she's like talking about the church. And she's like, yeah, he was like really good controlling about what we wore. Like he would make me like return clothes I would buy for dad. And I'm like, he cared about what dad wore. And she's like, yeah, he had a lot of funny rules. Like we weren't allowed to be friends with anyone on staff at the church. I'm like, okay.
We're
back up. Yeah. So then my
entering
dad,
a different territory.
Yeah, my dad starts talking. He's like, oh yeah, one time he was speaking at a church and they put a timer underneath the pulpit. This is before smartphones or anything. And when he saw the timer, he literally chucked it into the audience out of rage because he's like, I will not be timed. And I was like, okay, so you guys were a part of a cult.
100%.
And if you like came out of like fundamental Baptist background, once you're out of that fundamental movement, you're like, you can't even drink root beer because it has the word beer in it. It has something to do with alcohol. It just has the word beer in it. So it's like, it's very like, those are the things where I'm like, oh my gosh, you guys were in a cult. Like we got out. Like thank God we got out.
Wow, literally, thank God.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's a fun, heavy fact, honey.
I know. But it's funny to see like where God's brought me because people are like, oh, what's your like spiritual background? I'm like, well, really charismatic, really culty, really, you know. Like,
and I love that like you like love Jesus so much despite all that.
Oh yeah, totally.
And have a very like non-religious connection with him.
Oh yeah, yeah. Because I think that it was always very natural for me to separate Jesus from the church.
Yeah,
and that was important for me. You know,
so glad
he gave his life for the church, but Jesus and the church are not one.
Yes,
the church is his bride. You know, his broken bride.
You're about to open up another. You're about to open up a whole nother conversation for us to have.
We're going to talk about the bride of Christ.
But we will eventually. I think that's definitely part of our stories. Yeah, for sure.
So do you want to kind of start like with your history with community? Like, has it always been easy for you to cultivate community, or is this something that you've like really grown in?
That's a really good question. I have always been a relational human being, to my detriment almost.
Yeah.
To the detriment of my education, of my school. It's always been social life for me. So friendship and community has always been something I have always cultivated in my life to different degrees. Now, when I was early 20s, I was a part of a church, a big church, and I found really great community. I had started into the community college that my church had, and that really helped me find a community within this really big church. And then from there, I just was able to grow and build community. What was interesting about that experience in my early 20s was that when life shifted for my husband and I, when God called us out of that church community, this was the only church I had ever been a part of because I met the Lord at 19. So what I wasn't anticipating was that the relationships would disintegrate due to no longer being under the same church. Right. That was new for me because that was the only...
You're like, wait, you guys are my friends.
Right.
We're just going to stay friends.
Right. And I had seen it happen to other people, but I didn't think that would happen to me. Mm-hmm. I thought like, no, what we have is deep. It's real. It's like we just like grew in the Lord together for like years, and we sat through deep things with each other. Like surely our friendship can exist beyond these walls. And that unfortunately was just not the case for most of my friendships. Wow. About like 80 or 90% of them couldn't continue to exist.
Which, as someone who like puts so much equity and importance on relationships, that must have been truly
heartbreaking,
just shattering.
It was shattering. And yet so good in the sense of I really got to discover and learn how to develop friendship with Jesus and really trust him with my friends. And really had a few years there where there were lonely years, and that was painful for me, for my personality type, but was also sweet simultaneously because I got to learn how to just cultivate a ton of intimacy with the Lord. And I'm someone who I would say I feel like there's people who can be extremes in this arena of like Jesus being your best friend versus having friends, right? There can be this like interesting...
Sometimes it can be almost like a shield. Self-protection, being like, oh, Jesus is enough for me. And it's like, actually, Jesus made you for community. He heard directly from the Father, but he still surrounded himself with friends.
Yes. And I think, watching the Chosen series. Oh, yeah. Again, I'm such a visual person. So like the Chosen has been like such a cool experience to like see Jesus like incarnation, like actually see, what life, some iteration of what life could have looked like for them. But like he was always surrounded by people. Like Jesus is the example of friendship. And he had friends. Like, yes, he had that quiet time with the Lord, but he also like sat with his people, communed with his people. And so
he discipled through friendship. He didn't disciple through lessons. Like he was a rabbi, he was a teacher, but he discipled through friendship.
You're so right. Doing life with each other. That's so right. Yeah. So I feel like that season was necessary to really have that time with the Lord and be able to have space to develop tremendous intimacy with Jesus, so that I could be a better friend. Mm-hmm. It was almost like that's when I had to come face to face with like my codependency in friendship, my unhealthy expectations in friendship, my people pleasing in friendship, my fears that were in friendship, my control that was in friendship, like all of these things I was able to come face to face with
through the Lord, through time with Jesus,
through the breaking of friendship. and then in my time with Jesus.
Wow.
But like the breaking of friendship needed to happen for me to be able to start reflecting like on my behaviors.
Wow.
And my expectations. And then it was navigating new friendship and people who pursued me or wanted to be in my world, and us just maybe having different expectations of how we saw each other. I feel like with like the gifting that I have of just like kind of like exhorting, encouraging, I can be that person where people look to. But I was like, man, I need people. I need people who I can do life with. And so my prayer was for many years, Lord, bring me the people that I can do life with.
Mm-hmm.
Like I want either just that bestie or people like besties where I can just like be in intimate relationship with and just do life with. And it took a few years for that prayer to get answered. And I'm grateful for those years that were kind of sparse and lonely, because there was things being built in me, good things being built in me that allowed me to be a healthier friend.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm very grateful for that. I'm glad to be a healthier friend.
So much.
Me too.
I'm glad on my behalf that I get to experience your health.
Same, literally. I'm glad that you get to see a healthier version of me than, you know, how I was functioning before.
Right.
Because, you know, I can take ownership for like the ways that my unhealth like was part of the disintegration of friendships. You know?
Yeah, me too. Oh yeah. I like look back, because part of my story with Cultivating Community, like I really started following the Lord pretty hard when I got to college, and then met people through my sorority and my campus ministry, and just kind of like pulled, like me and this like group of girls, like there's like 7 of us, we like pulled into a house together. And
the dream.
Yeah, it really was. I mean, it was amazing. Like I shared my room, and then I shared like a bed in my room. And you know, we just had all these people who lived with us, and it was amazing. However, we were all like learning and growing in our faith.
Yeah.
And I had to learn how to be a good friend and get broken in relationship, not outside of relationship. So I had to be confronted by like my best friends in the house being like, you are manipulative.
Wow.
You tried to manipulate me in this situation.
Wow.
I felt manipulated, and I had to be like, okay.
Wow.
And like when you're like young like that, when you're 19, 18, 19, 20, you're
they even had words for that. It's really amazing to me.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
But also it's like crazy, because I feel like we see this now that we're older. We look at teenagers and we're like, you're so unaware. You just have no clue. You're just acting out of impulse, you know, it's like a toddler. And being hit by that at a young, formidable age, and being like, okay, I actually want to grow in this area, and to be like doing it almost in the accountability. I think that's one of the greatest things that community brings, is there's a sense of an accountability that comes along with it. Now, not in like a mean, abusive way, but these were people who loved me that were telling me these things, like, you hurt me when you did this, you know, like this hurt when you said that, or like, you need to be true to your word, because like I need to be able to trust you. These are like foundational things that are happening in like my young 20s.
God bless those friends.
I know.
Literally.
I know.
What a gift.
I really look at that time in my life, and I'm like, that was special because of that, learning how to deal with conflict. Even coming into, you know, I married Cam when I was 23, 24, moved up here to Virginia, and I'm just like plopped into a new state, and I have to make friends.
Wow.
And I wasn't scared. It's always been pretty easy for me to make friends. We actually, this is crazy. So Cam and I are trying to get our trailer off the hitch the very first day that we're moving to our apartment. And this guy is like skateboarding past us. He's just ripped. I think he was a Navy SEAL. And he's like, hey, do you need help with your trailer? And Cam's like, yeah. And so he helps get off the hitch, and he goes, I'm going to a young adults group tonight at my church in the oceanfront. You guys should come. Or we go to Trinity.
Oh, wow.
I know. And I was like, sure, why not? And I looked at Cam, and I'm like, you want to go? And he's like, sure. And then we went there that night. We met Chandler.
Oh my gosh.
We went that night. And Chandler and Alina are still like our best friends. Hi, Chan, if you're listening to this. Still our best friends to this day. And we got plugged into Trinity Church that day. And that was a prayer of mine. Like, we moved there. I was like, God, please don't let me like be church shopping forever.
Yeah.
And so like we were at Trinity for a while. We're not there anymore. But it was just, we instantly just like said yes to the first church, and then got plugged in, and then said yes to the first small group, and we're still literally friends with those people to this day. Like,
amazing.
Like, we had kids together, and I think that like I learned a lot of things in that season of my life of being in a new place, in a new community, having to like rebuild things. And that was like, when we talked about this before, like putting yourself out there, not being offended by people, like having a generous outlook on people. Like, okay, they might not want to hang out right now, but it's probably not personal, you know, or like, you know, just like having to be like generous in your mind towards them. And also like not being super picky. Like, I remember getting into our small group, and like they were people that were given to me, and they weren't necessarily people I would have like hunted down or that I had a lot in common with. But because we just did years and years of like growing up together, those are some of my best friends now, you know?
It's really amazing.
Yeah.
I think it's one thing I find very impressive about you is how you have been able to maintain so many friendships over the years too, like that friendships of people who have moved. A lot of those core group of friends that you're referring to from that season have moved.
Yeah.
But you've maintained such beautiful friendship with them.
I just love people.
That's really impressive to me. And I don't know if there's any keys in that that you could share that has allowed you to maintain those friendships. But
maintenance, that's interesting. I think that first and foremost that I have been really honest with people. Like, I'm like, listen, I'm not good at my phone. It doesn't reflect how much I value you when I drop the ball. So like if I miss your call, if I don't get your text, like a lot of my friends who I've been maintained friendship with are just like not offendable. Yeah. So they're just like, hey, like I actually opened up a text from a friend who just moved back into town. She lived in DC for a few years. And when I opened up her thread saying, hey, I'm back in coastal Virginia, I opened it up and I saw that I had missed the last 6 text messages. And I was like, I'm so sorry. And she's like, literally no problem. Yeah, she's like, I don't care at all. I'm just happy to see you again. And I'm like, thank you. And that's what, like, I mean, for me, like, I've always said this, I would rather like take a flight to see you than like jump on a call with you. Yes. I would rather drive 2 hours to have coffee with you than to text you back. Yeah.
I know. I think when you and I first became friends and I was able to see the way that your relationship was with your phone, it was so helpful for me, honestly, to like be like, okay, this is a Meg thing. This is not a me thing. Yeah. You know, because I think like when you enter into friendships, it is wildly vulnerable. Oh, like it is so scary because you're just like, okay, I really like you. Do you like me? Like I kind of want to make more space for you. Do you want to make more space for me? It is this like vulnerable tango that you kind of like enter into with someone. And I think the immature version of Yasmina would have seen the way that you are with your phone and could have felt very insecure. But I think because I observed the way that you were with your friend, I was like, oh, this is just literally Meg. So it allowed me to just kind of like release phone expectations with you.
Thank you. And you were better for it.
I am the one better for it. You're so right. Because the only person that would have been affecting would have been me.
Right. Yeah.
You know, and I think there is something so beautiful to like enter into a friendship and just be like really forthcoming, be like, hey, this is kind of actually how I function. Yeah. I even had to tell 2 newer friends recently, like, who are really good about checking in and like asking how I am. But like my little pet peeve with my phone is like,
you don't like to text long responses like that.
Yes, it's so hard for me. Yeah. And like if someone asks me how I am
on a text
via text message, I take that question too seriously. Yeah. I take it too seriously.
Yeah, because I think about it, I'm like, I'm great, you.
Yeah. I like, to me, I'm like, to say I'm great, you is like, I feel like I'm lying.
Right. Yeah.
You know, it feels like so inauthentic because I'm like, there's so many things that I actually feel like go into how I'm doing.
Right, yeah.
And so when you ask me that, I'm like, that's a hard question for me to receive via text message because I will want to take it seriously. I want to honor that question so much that I'll avoid it.
Yes.
Until I have the space and time. And now being a mom of 3, I'm just, it's been summer. I'm like, I don't have space and time. So now your text message is sitting there. So I had to like, even recently just let these beautiful ladies know, hey, this is not a you thing. Just so you know, this is not about my value of you in my life. This is actually very much a me thing and my limitations, which I think is such a beautiful thing to be forthcoming about in community.
Yes. Well, I mean, we were talking about vulnerability. I was just thinking like, that is something that, even like saying it, I like feel it's like body response that we've really had to lean into. Yeah. I think that is actually what makes or breaks relationships, not just community and like friendship, like marriages, like having to really choose vulnerability. And I feel like we've done that really well, not just in our own friendship, but in our community. We've chosen insane levels of vulnerability that I've never experienced before. Yep. Where we're literally like, I'm just like the first thing that pops into my head is like, oh my gosh, like the last 2 birthday parties we've celebrated with our best friends and this like group that we've created, we've done inner healing.
Yeah, and deliverance.
And deliverance.
Literally.
The first time I saw that in person, like in our group, it was so impactful to me. I've seen it happen before, but I've never seen it in vulnerability. Like, like where like you're really just like sitting in a small, because sometimes like doing things in a big crowd is easier than doing things with like 5 of your closest friends.
For sure.
And I left there and I was like literally texting my best friends that live back in Florida. And I was like, you'll never believe what I just sat through. Like this was so powerful.
So beautiful.
I'm so blessed. And that's one side of vulnerability. That's like a really beautiful, fun thing to talk about. The hard parts of vulnerability have been, hey, I feel left out.
Yeah.
Like those are the hardest words to say for me.
100.
I feel left out.
100%.
I like when we talked about the other day, I feel like there are scenarios in my head that I'm having to fight right now because I'm believing lies. And I just need you to either reassure me or like have a conversation with me about it.
Or clarify this or help me to understand.
Yeah. Or saying, you've hurt my feelings. Yeah. My feelings are hurt. When you said this, I hurt my feelings. Like those are way harder to do than sometimes even like casting out demons. You know what I mean?
100%. Because it takes vulnerability. And I think it would be good for us to maybe even, you've said this really, you've like described this really beautifully before, your definition or like the way you would describe vulnerability to someone. Why don't you do that? Because I think not everyone understands that fully.
So I heard this said once, and I can't remember where, but there's a difference between transparency and vulnerability. And transparency is letting someone look through the windows of your house. So they can kind of see what's going on or what's happened. They have this like little screenshot of it. But vulnerability is like letting someone come into your house and see your house, because now they have an effect on your home. They can take something, they can break something, they can judge, they can see the dust, you know, they can like be in there. And I've noticed that like some people think that they're being vulnerable because they're sharing parts of their life. But true vulnerability is like removing the shield around your heart and being like, hey, you can hurt me. Like I'm actually like, I'm showing you my heart in a way where like you have an effect on me. Your response now has an effect on me. That's much different than transparency, right?
Absolutely.
And so I think that like even in marriage, I've had to learn the difference of showing someone a piece of my heart versus like letting them into the rooms of my heart. Yeah. And being like, be really careful because you're in there now. Yeah. And you could hurt me, you know?
So good. The thing about vulnerability, you were kind of talking about like the risk of vulnerability a little bit, which the risk of vulnerability is, oh, you could really hurt me. Oh, you could really see me. Yeah. You could really see my imperfections or where I'm lacking. And you can make an opinion about me. That's the risk, right, of vulnerability. But the reward of vulnerability is like we can experience tremendous joy and connection and breakthrough together and intimacy and like safety and all of these things. That's like the reward of choosing vulnerability.
To be fully seen and fully accepted is wildly different than being partially seen and fully accepted.
Wow. Like, say that again.
Okay. Being fully seen and fully accepted is wildly different than being partially seen and fully accepted.
Oh,
and I'm air quoting it, fully accepted, right? Because like when someone really sees all of you, right? Like, you know, it happens in marriage all the time where they like see these like sides of you that you're like, I didn't want you to see that side of me, you know? And then in friendship, as you walk, and for someone to be like, I still choose to love you and I still think that you're beautiful. And that's like such safety to be like, okay, you're about to like learn something about me, or you're about to experience something. You're about to experience one of my wounds and you're still going to choose to love me after that. Wow, that's safety.
Yeah. And that's what we get with the Lord, right?
That's what we get with the Lord. We're modeling that.
Exactly. And I think when we allow ourselves to be fully seen and fully known by the Lord, I think you just like so beautifully explain that there is something that really powerfully happens with our connection with the Lord that allows us to also then have the bravery and the courage to do that with people.
Yes.
You know,
it has to start with the Lord.
It has
to. Because what happens if you would look to people to see and accept you before you look to God, it actually just like breeds codependency. I'm just like thinking about like my journey with that because it took me a lot longer to learn it with the Lord than it did to learn it with friendship.
Interesting.
I just feel like when you are raised in a very left brain church setting where like you know a lot of facts about God, versus like a right brain church setting where you like experience God,
right?
You know what I mean? Like it was hard for me to be like, I'm like, oh, of course God knows me, knows my heart, and accepts me, of course, you know. But like learning more about what it looks like to really like choose intimacy with the Father. Like I feel like you've done a really good job of that, and you've walked a lot of people through doing that.
It's my favorite. It's one of my favorite things.
So if someone's struggling with that, being seen and known in front of the Lord, like what would you share with them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think what we all have to come down to, and I don't know if this is going to answer your question, and I don't know if there's a reason why this can be a pain point for people. You've experienced something in your counseling session recently that I've been mulling over when you talked about this with your counselor. We'll get to that in a minute, but truly, we are presented truth by the word, right? The word gives us the truth of who God is, the truth of who he says we are, and the truth of who we are and why we are that way because of Christ. Like, because of Christ, we are all of these things. We are righteous, we are justified, we are sanctified. Like, all of these things are because of Christ. We have to literally choose to believe it. Not only choose to believe it, we have to choose for that to be enough. Yeah. I think it is a decision to say, not only do I receive this, but I believe it and I fully accept it. I fully choose to walk in that truth, because our feelings will always say something different. And I'm an experiential feeling person, and I'm not going to always feel like, and I think what I've had to do, kind of what you were saying even earlier, you have this beautiful ability to separate Jesus from the church. And I think for me, I've had to separate Jesus and who he says I am from people. When I feel misunderstood, when I feel unseen, when I feel unloved, when I feel certain things in my body, I can go to the Lord and literally say, I feel this, but I thank you, Lord, that you say this over me. You see me, you know me, you understand me when no one else does. And that truly has become enough for me. And it's a decision of, I think, that this is enough, that like Christ's love and Christ's truth, the Father's love and his truth over me is enough, has been the way that I've been able to walk in that. Does that make sense? Oh, yeah. Now, you have mentioned something interesting where you kind of talked about this little piece with your counselor, and she kind of brought up the P word, that there could be pride. Remember when you were talking about, like, I know God loves me. It doesn't necessarily like solve my problem.
Right. I remember telling her, I was like, I know God loves me. I never doubted that.
Yeah.
I just wish it mattered more to me.
Right.
I wish, this is my exact words, I wish it impacted me more.
Right.
And she said, that's pride. And then she goes, we'll talk about that later.
Yes.
And we're still like uncovered.
That was like mic drop.
Yeah.
And I've actually just been chewing on that. I'm like, pride. Wow. Like, that's a really interesting perspective that I was really grateful to hear, honestly, because I feel like that could be a key for a lot of people. Yeah. You know? And so,
because fear of man, would you say fear of man's attached to shame, which shame and pride are like two parts of the same coin.
Right. And yeah, I think like if choosing people's adoration over us, or their love, their words, their thoughts and opinions and perspectives of us over the Lord, I mean, then that's idolization as well and that's the people pleasing, and that is just going to ultimately not produce good fruit. I mean, it leads to internal death.
It's so true. Okay. So talking about like going back to like the community for people who need it, practically speaking, I would say, I'll talk about believers and I'll talk about like if you're not a part of a church too, because there's going to be some of you guys who church isn't an option, or your church doesn't have community or whatever. I would say practically, where I have found my most impacting community has been through the church.
Yeah.
I've been to many churches, and over the course of 20 years, I've been to a few different churches, and I have found people who not just are believers, but I've just slowly collected hearts that I knew were after the Lord and were growing like in themselves, like they were growing, and they were in similar phases of life as me. Like that really, honestly, that's like a practical thing. Like I've started seeing who my kids were playing with and being like, oh, yeah, what's your name? And then walking in vulnerability, right? Being like, hey, like, you guys want to come over? My house isn't very clean, but I can make coffee. I have cinnamon rolls. You know what I mean? And like that, I just have found to be really, really helpful. And then outside of that, I also have found that like my gym is a place I feel like there are Facebook communities you can get on. We've talked about the Wild and Free homeschooling book. There's like Wild and Free communities people can find. There's co-ops, like there's all these different ways. But ultimately at the end of the day, it's your choice whether or not you put yourself out there, and it has to be trial and error. There's people that I have spent time with where I'm like, I don't think I really see a big future here. Yeah. And I've had to walk away from it. And it's just okay. That's just life. And there's people who've walked away from me, which is worse.
Which I don't prefer.
Which hurts more. But like, once again, like if you don't choose vulnerability, you're going to be lonely.
100%.
That you have to walk in that.
And I think a big thing that we got to hit on here with cultivating vulnerability, and probably the biggest hindrance to a healthy, thriving community, would be the fear of rejection.
I knew you were going to say that. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, like because I was thinking about everything you're saying. I was like, okay, what do you need to not have within you to pursue, right? Because cultivating communities takes tremendous pursuit.
It does. It takes pursuit.
Yeah. Intentionality.
Intentionality, vulnerability.
Yes.
So I would say, as someone who is like recovering from rejection, is what we talked about with like getting your security from the Lord, right? Yeah. Being like, I'm going to put myself out there. It's not going to kill me to hear no. Yeah. Like, because it doesn't take away any worth or any value. Like, the enemy wants you. You have to be like aware of the enemy's plan, right? Yes. Like, I'm about to seek out someone. It's just like when you date, right? You're like, I'm about to put myself out there. Like, I know the enemy is going to have a foothold. And he's going to be trying to pull me down if I'm not like aware of his attack plan. Yeah. If his attack plan is like shame, then build yourself up in your faith. You know what I mean? And remember that like, it's not your identity. It's not the truth. Right. Right. It's so true. And I think there is that reality of like, we're not always going to be everyone's cup of tea, but like, you have to like try it. You have to like try some sips to like know what is, you know? And I tell my kids that all the time. Yeah. I'm like, it's actually not your job to make everyone like you. Yeah, exactly. That was a lesson I did not learn literally until I was in like my late 20s. It's not my job to make everyone like me. That's all I've tried to do my entire life. Right. What? Oh my gosh. I should get that like on a plaque in my house. It's not my job to make everyone like me. It's so true. And either people are going to like see the gold in you or they're not. I think that's a big thing we talk about, right? Is like, and I think as like 30 somethings who have growing families, growing in like what we're doing at home, whether it be like homeschooling or making babies or whatever it may be, like you do have to start getting more just intentional about like how you're expounding your social energy. And so that means sometimes like you're gonna fine tune who you're gonna spend time with. And I think for me that's been a big transition, being someone who's like, I had 50 people invited to my birthday party every year to like now I have 7 or 8. You know, like that has been a big lesson for me to learn, that like it's okay to fine tune who I really feel like there's a mutual value here. I see the gold in them, they see the gold in me, and like we honor the gold in each other. Yeah. And those are the people I'm going to make the most space for in my life, because that's where I feel safe and that's where I'm going to feel the most refreshed. Yeah. And I think being in a season of motherhood where we are literally like pouring so much of ourselves out, I need to be filled up. Oh yeah. And the biggest way I'm filled up personally is through relationships. So I'm going to be very like intentional about how I spend that time with people. As you're talking about that, like seeing the gold in other people, them seeing the gold in you, there's something that you said today when we were talking before this about not playing games. Yes. And when you said that, I like laughed internally because I'm like, you thought of all the times you played games? No, just kidding. Well, I've thought about more of I knew when people were doing it with me. Yes. And you know what it is more than anything? It's posts I've watched people make on social media that are passive aggressive. I've watched people be like, well, if you're not going to like, don't give people the time of day that aren't going to blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, wow, there's a lot of assumptions made 100%. Through fear of rejection, through hurt. And so people are like, well, I reached out for them to come and get coffee last week and they took a whole day to respond to me. Then they said no. So now I'm going to wait for them to reach out to me. And I'm like, oh, that's going to block you from a lot of friendships. It makes me sad. Me too. The fear of rejection actually like literally breaks my heart because, I feel emotions rising up. It's coming. It's those pregnancy hormones. I just think back to, that used to literally take up so much space in my mind and in my heart in mid-20s. Like, I just think back to when I reflect on like a lot of my friendships and the way that I like functioned during that time, I just see how the fear of rejection basically just played such a big role, really diminished, like just took away from freedom in those friendships and joy in those friendships and just freedom in myself. You know, like it hurts my heart when I see women and men, but obviously just like women being my world, really let the fear of rejection
dictate the way that they get to cultivate friendships, because it really does, like,
it makes you test people. It's
yes,
testing,
it
right?
is testing.
And that is a really dangerous thing to enter into.
It is.
When it comes to community, really dangerous.
It is.
And I've been tested before. And I've tested my husband, not so much my friendships. It's funny how like the same hurt in your life can produce different fruit. Like for me, I am not someone that fear of rejection plays in a place where I'm keeping tallies in my head, because my brain is
you don't have space for tallies.
I don't have space for tallies.
There's no file
but
cabinet
I've
for
been
that.
tallied.
Yes.
And I've had people be like, I was waiting to see how long it would take you for you to reach out for blank. And in my brain, I'm like, I wish that you would assume that I truly love you, because the truth is I really love you. Yeah. And you're actually operating under a lie that I don't care about you, because you have this scoring system in your brain. Yeah. And I haven't met the score that I should have. Yes. And because of that, we've just lost intimacy. But like the truth is, I deeply love you. Yeah. Yep. And
it didn't have to go this way.
Yeah. And I'm sorry I disappointed you. But like the playing games piece, I see it happening. And I actually realized this like little influx also via social media, watch people's stories of people being like, people like putting on their stories in the opposite way, saying, I am not going to assume that you don't like me if you do X, Y, and Z. I'm going to assume. And there's like a funny meme of like cooking pasta, like FaceTiming someone, like a kid hanging off your thing, like a baby breastfeeding, like, you know, and you just like see this meme of this like mom who's just trying to keep it all together. And I'm like, that's kind of how I want to approach things when I feel that fear of rejection rising up, being like, this person's probably not trying to hurt me. Yeah. They probably have just as much things going on in their life as I do. Yes. It's crazy out here.
It is crazy out here.
We are insane.
It is crazy in these streets. 100%. Yes. Yeah, I agree. I think I would love to like really sit in that subject, and maybe we can do another whole topic about just like rejection. Yeah. But I think one of the things I would love to maybe just like give an example of just like what rejection sounds like. I think especially in the testing world, you've kind of mentioned. But I think it's like, I remember the thoughts of like, oh, I haven't heard from them in weeks. They must not X, Y, and Z, element of P. Yeah. Therefore, I'm not. Right. I'm going to wait until they. Right. Those kind of sentences are number one indications that is the fear of rejection speaking. And if you can connect to those thoughts that are happening within you and your friendships, I want to encourage you to like bring that to the Lord and like really lean into that and like trust him with your heart, and like text that person anyways. Give them the benefit of the doubt anyways. Be honest, like, hey, I haven't heard from you in a while. I'm really missing you. Is everything okay? Or is there anything I've done? Is there any way I can be supporting you? And I think that's how we kind of
be curious.
Be curious. Exactly. And like, and if they say, oh my gosh, no, I'm so sorry, I've just been blah, 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 like, hopefully that will, number one, give you some perspective. But number two, if this is an intimate friendship, I think when we go back to that vulnerability piece, you can say in a kind way, rooted in Jesus, like, right? Like your overall well-being being rooted in the Lord. You can also say, it's kind of just, I would actually love to see you more. I would love to hear from you more. Like I've kind of just felt sad.
I want to create more space for you.
I want to create more space. Like how can I get in your world more? How can we do this life together more? Whatever. Just be honest.
It's the clarity.
Clarity.
Remember how the other day you called me? We were like, we were like not necessarily in a tiff, but there was something that needed clarity. Okay. And you said, oh, clarity is just like such a gift, or clarity is such mercy. You just you just wanted clarity on something. Yes. And afterwards, you had this huge sense of relief.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just want people to walk in that so much.
Because the lack of clarity comes from the narratives that we create. Right. You know what I mean? Or the confusion that we lean
suspicion,
into. Yeah, right? Exactly. And it feeds the insecurity. Yeah. And it feeds the rejection, quite honestly.
I think I've like become, and actually we were talking about this beforehand. Brené Brown.
Yes.
She talked about something. Oh, she called it, I'm not going to say what she actually called it because there's a swear word in it, but she called it the crappy first draft. Okay. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Which book is it from?
I can't even remember which book
it's probably from The Gift of Imperfections, I would assume. Or maybe
the
like
Brave. The Power of Vulnerability.
The Power of Vulnerability. Okay.
So she talks about the crappy first draft. It's basically writing down, she's like, act like when you're writing an essay, you have like all these different drafts, right? The first draft is the worst one. That is like suspicion. So let's say like someone doesn't call me back, doesn't come to my baby shower, whatever, fill in the blank. And I'm like, oh, maybe my crappy first draft is they've probably forgotten about me because like they have all these new friends, or like I'm just like not a good enough friend, or like I'm not valuable to them, blah, blah, blah. And then I might like come back to that and be like, okay, there's a lot of insecurity in that. What would I actually know? Okay, this person has been too busy for me. They probably are just preoccupied, blah, blah, blah. My final draft would probably say something along the lines of, I get more and more generous in my assumptions.
Yes.
And then out of that final draft of like being able to think through that clearly, getting clarity. Like, hey, I haven't heard from you in a while. Is everything okay? Being curious.
Yep.
Instead of coming to them being like, testing them. Or coming to them being like, hey, I guess I'm not good enough for you anymore.
100%.
You know?
100%. Passive aggressiveness and sarcasm is just never going to be grounds.
It's not going to get you anywhere.
For vulnerability and intimacy. You were saying something that made me also want to mention this. I think a key as well that I think has been so vital in my ability to navigate through the complexities of being in intimate relationship and vulnerability that I think has kept me healthier in friendship, like in this iteration of my friendship life versus like previous, is really going to the Lord, like really bringing your heart to the Lord first. You can have hurts and offenses and questions and confusions, but really take time before you even confront that.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
You know, like I think there's something really powerful about bringing your heart to the Lord first and bringing these pains and these questions and these insecurities to the Lord first and letting him speak to the things that he can, you know, going back to truth of like, no, of his love for you and his acceptance of you and all these things. And often like there'll be times where I'll like work through certain things where I'm like, I just need to forgive this, and this. And then I'll be left over with something still. And if that thing I have left over is something that I feel like, no, this actually is something I can work out with my friend. Yeah. Like, I feel like I've taken full responsibility of my heart to at least have brought certain things to the Lord, because sometimes the issue is like, honestly, it's 90% my heart, right? The condition of my heart. But there's still a 10% where it's like, you know, in friendship, can I just like let you in on like this thing actually like has confused me, or this has hurt me, or like I kind of need this. Like there is space for that. But if I'm looking to my friend to fulfill 90% of like my heart's condition and need, and only giving 10% of that to the Lord, that's where the imbalance comes. And that's where I think like the codependency happens in friendship, as well as like unnecessary drama and like
expectations.
Yeah. And eventually probably a breakup, you know?
Yeah, I think so.
That didn't ever have to happen.
I think you're so right. So some of the resources that I want to leave our audience with is The Gifts of Imperfection.
Yes.
Brené Brown.
Yes. And like, we're going to preface Brené Brown. We're not in agreement with everything that she says and does. I know she's like out there with a lot of things right now, but the book of Imperfections, The Gift of Imperfections by Brené Brown. Also, you said there was another book, The Vulnerability.
Power of Vulnerability.
Power of Vulnerability. I haven't read that one, but I do know that a big part of Brené Brown's like time, right? Her research was like 20 years in literally researching vulnerability and wholehearted living.
Yes.
And I will say that book, The Gift of Imperfections, gave me like a roadmap, a language, tremendous clarity on how to live vulnerable that literally changed the way I could show up in friendship.
I would agree.
Yeah.
I think it actually like almost, not want to say it saved my marriage, but like it really set me up to give me the language to bring to Cam when we were really struggling in our marriage. It was very helpful for me.
Highly recommend.
One of the books that you and I have we both read Brené Brown and this next book that I'm about to mention separately. And I feel like, thank the Lord that we like came to each other after post seasons.
Yeah.
Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. Yes. By
Pete Scazzero.
That's right. He is a pastor out of Queens.
Nice.
Flushing. He's like, it's crazy. My dad started a church around the area.
That's awesome.
So my uncle and my dad actually like know who Pete Scazzero is.
That's awesome.
Isn't that crazy? His book is so helpful also with the language, and he is a strong believer, and he has a podcast that's just to help me learn so much about overfunctioning, underfunctioning, pride, people pleasing, generational things have been passed down. He talks a lot about that. But those two books, if you can get your hands on them, Gifts of Imperfection by Brené Brown, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality by Pete Scazzero. He has a lot of different books. They both have multiple, but make sure you look up those titles. I would say those are really good places to start.
Yes.
They don't sound like they're good places to start when it comes to building community, but they are, because it addresses your heart.
Yes, because it is all about your heart.
It is all about your heart. It is.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think this is a great place to wrap up.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want
I think
to share?
we can say a lot more, and I think we will in the future, but I hope that this gives you guys just some grid, just some things to even just reflect on within your heart, of things that like you could either lean into, whether that be practically speaking or within your heart, We really pray that this will encourage that process with you and the Lord so that you can just make new and beautiful, healthy steps towards cultivating connection in your life. Amen.